If you haven't been, if you're new, welcome to Ask Some Praxis. We try to do this every 2 weeks. We intend to make it as open-ended as possible to get your thoughts, questions, feedback around a particular topic. Usually we will chum the water with some content and some ideas of our own that we bring to the table, and then we want to hear your thoughts, your questions, etc. So the topic today from this lovely team of professionals here, each from our own different role and perspective, is this. It's about task management and what to use when. So there's an enormous amount of capability coming from Microsoft regarding task management. And we all have, as we talked about, as we kind of assembled for this call, I mean, 3 out of the 6 of us still use to some degree paper because we're better at taking notes than typing, or it's handy, or it's the way I've always done it, et cetera. But Microsoft's got an enormous tool set out there for us, but it seems like there's some conflict into they overlap with each other, or they may in some cases just not be a good fit. So we're going to talk about specific use cases for task management for both individuals and teams. And Emily's going to drill in for us.
All right. So starting us off, our first slide that we're going to take a peek at, it was actually at last year's Ignite about task management, where Microsoft provides us with this huge graphic of what feeds into what. So we can see, for example, OneNote through Outlook can get to do with tasks. These markers, the key on the bottom right of in progress and longer term, I was checking my dev tenant this week, and this all still seems to be true. So for example, something that we can be looking forward to is To Do and Planner showing in a new app called Tasks within Teams. That's not there just yet. But while I was walking through, kind of looking at all these different integrations, this slide can be a little bit overwhelming. So I created a grid for us to talk about a little bit more. So which applications are connecting to which? So green check mark, direct connection in them. So for example, if I made a to-do tag in OneNote, of course, that's appearing in OneNote. That's on our top left. Another thing you can do in OneNote, for example, is have some of your Outlook tasks. And that earlier example I described was OneNote Outlook tasks can then feed into to-do. So you can get a little bit creative when you're making these connections. Another thing you'll notice on this chart that we have is where we put in icons for Power Automate, where you can connect across these different solutions with a flow. But essentially, looking at all of them, this doesn't necessarily give you the answer of, well, which do I use as an individual, team, or enterprise? And our very classic Simpraxis answer is, it depends. So when we're first thinking about that, it depends, you want to think about what your group is working on. So if we're talking about how to implement team task management, one of the top items you want to start with is the company culture. How does your company work together and want to continue working together? Just like any other solution that you want to implement, you want to capture the varying needs across your organization. You might have some deskless workers. You might have some people that have more urgent task tracking needs, or one department, cross-functional. Make sure you address these challenges and identify any of the gaps that you currently have. I'll pause here just to make sure, Simpraxis team, if anyone else has any additions for when we're talking about capturing those varying needs.
You might have curmudgeons.
Oh,
true, paper users.
We don't have any of those.
I think, Emily, this came up in a call with a client earlier this week that Mark and I were on, and I love to ask this question as kind of a baseline as we're getting to know a client at kickoff. And the question is, how do you take, track, and share notes from this meeting right now? Like, how are you going to do that? And some will be like, oh, I write them down and I transcribe them, or we write them in a shared OneNote notebook, et cetera. But that gives you a really quick baseline on their level of maturity around some of this stuff. Kind of like if you know pivot charts or not in Excel, or organic chem. If you're a pre-made, it's like a weeder kind of line.
Well, walking around,
I love that.
As a consultant, walking around an organization tells me a lot about that culture, right? Do you see a lot of yellow Post-its on the side of people's monitors? which means it's a different kind of culture than, very clean desks.
Yep.
Neither is better or worse. It's just, you have to know your user base. So when you're thinking about which of these task tools to sort of push in your organization, you need to know who you're talking to and what they're likely to want to use. So getting out there and walking the halls and talking to people in the cafeteria and all that stuff is just as important as, the technology seeming cool.
So this is the baseline assessment too, and I'd love to talk about how not only are we assessing the baseline, but if we are trying to drive a consistent set of tools or new ways of working, what are some of the tools and techniques that we use? I know Don Hamburger, who joined us on the call today, I think, Don, it might be your first Ask in Praxis, but I remember when your organization had to move out of their headquarters because there was so much paper, they didn't have enough space to store it all, right? And then you undertook a huge initiative to digitize all that content, implemented some really interesting tools to do that. That's I'd be really interested to hear what people are doing to drive that change in terms of working differently. Sorry, Derek, I interrupted you.
I was going to say, in addition to understanding the company culture and how to capture, the different needs, it's also important to understand what the outcomes are of those and how you want to project them. So if you need to understand, if your task management is really at the individual level, that's about me and how I get my stuff done. But once you sort of elevate above that level, you end up in a situation where you may need reporting. And those reporting needs or those aggregation needs may end up driving some of the decisions that you make around task management.
I can give an anecdotal story to this. Back when I first started working, one of our head developers would manage all the bugs in the software with a sticky note. Every sticky note was a bug, and he had the sticky notes all over his office. And the way we assessed how we were doing was to go glance in his office and see how far the sticky notes had come. And then we were like, oh, hey, we're almost done. Look at how many notes we have left. We're down to 5. It's like amazing.
Right.
Probably not the best task management.
Task management isn't just about getting things done. It's also letting people know what you have done or what you still need to do, right? So how many sticky notes, how many tasks, how many outstanding whatevers.
Of course, he also used a DOS editor, the DOS text editor to write code, so he maybe was not the best example.
Notepad, yes.
Evelyn, maybe?
It was the DOS editor. This is before the text Notepad even existed.
All right.
Anyway.
To that point, that increase in transparency is a lot about what the Simpraxis team was debating about this week as we talked about this topic, where when you're increasing that transparency, right, of task management, you're reducing the time it takes for the project managers to share updates. You're giving better visibility into managers, into your workload and focus as an individual contributor. So if you're getting pulled too much into a cross-functional project and maybe you need their support to kind of realign how you're spending your time, or as Julie pointed out, the ability to check on action items of your colleagues when you're waiting on those next steps instead of having to choose to ping them and connect with them. And of course, when we're aligning that with our company culture, is your company trying to work together cross-functionally in those ways, or are you more siloed intentionally and it's a more formal process? One of my favorite things about increasing that transparency, though, is that opportunity for more people to be involved in your projects. And that's something we practice a lot at Simpraxis as a smaller team, where maybe there's 10 things on my list. Mark can do some of them, and I'm having a really busy day. Well, he can jump in and help get that work done. So we're all collaborating better across the team and with our different skill sets.
And that's one of your arguments against my pile of paper here, where I'm writing things down, because I can't handle this stuff. The sheet's actually very far away.
Very true. Yeah, especially in this COVID world, right? We can't rely on a lot of these traditional practices that we were maybe doing before, stopping by someone's desk, seeing that they're available and saying, hey, did you get that thing done just yet?
Yeah, and Emily, I think the necessity to work in new ways remotely and collaborate in new ways, and also the proliferation of tools from Microsoft has resulted in this topic that we're doing today being very popular. Like you and I, every day getting ready for this, we would see a new post that was like, oh, wow, we need to talk about that, et cetera. So can you talk about translating this? Obviously, there's some organizational work that goes into team-based task management. Can we talk about drilling down into the individual level? Like, how do I manage my day? How do I manage my work?
Absolutely. So this one, I think, highly personal, right? Because each person works differently, and having that available to you is great. But very often a framework can help you get started. One of my favorite ones is Getting Things Done framework. So whatever framework you use, it all comes from this idea that if you have 10 things going around in your mind, it can increase a lot of stress, because I'm telling myself, remember to, go to the grocery store, get the laundry, send that email to Mike, get the project to the client. I'm using all of my brain space for those little items to remember them. But instead, if I collected them and had them somewhere in a system that I trust, naturally, my mind is going to be focusing on that bigger game and solutioning, which everybody wants to do. So using the Getting Things Done framework as an example, there's a couple different steps you go through. First, you collect all the things you have to do. As Derek was pointing out, you clarify what that objective is, right? Figure out, do I have enough information to get that thing done? Step 3, I'm organizing it. And that's where a lot of the conversation is going to be happening today of, where am I organizing this content? Putting that content into these systems gives you the opportunity to reflect on, okay, now I can visually see in front of me, here's my lists of all my different items that I need to get done, what is most urgent, and when. And then I can begin to dive in and engage in those without my mind swirling, thinking about all those other items. It gives me a way greater ability to focus on just that one task at hand. So thinking about individual and team task management, let's hop over to right tool for the right task at the right time. So as we saw in that initial slide across Microsoft, there's a couple different areas and there's some overlap. Some of the most powerful tools that we found at Simpraxis are within To-Do and Outlook. Those both support the transparency of your tasks across teams if you want to share them, gives you the ability to organize and collect them. And there's a lot of integrations being built in where To-Do is essentially a nicer UI for the classic Outlook tasks that we love. That's going to soon feed into Planner in Teams like we've discussed. So I have a one-stop shop of potentially seeing my personal tasks next to my team tasks. So when you're doing that evaluation for your team task management, make sure that you're also considering where people are going to be doing that individual task management and how they can see both at the same time, because they're both equally important.
And Emily, is there a question of on what device? Because I think there's probably some to-do conversations around mobile devices as well.
Yeah, great point. So To-Do has a wonderful mobile app. I've been starting to use it for personal and work. So do think about where your workers are going to be and when those little brilliant ideas come up as well. Very often, my to-do items happen not when I'm at my desk doing my work, but when I'm mowing the lawn or trying to go to sleep. And these things pop up in your mind, right? And either you're going to stay up all night trying to remember it, or you have something really convenient and handy to record that task down to look at at a later time.
Yep. Can we talk to Derek? I definitely want to hear from Derek, because I know Derek had an interesting use case of that kind of blend of the individual non-work task management with work task management. Derek, do you want to speak to that a bit?
Well, I'm trying to remember what I said to you, but I mean, it was
about E.
Oh, about my son. Okay, so so personally, I made the switch about a year and a half ago to go completely digital on my note taking. I was a notepad next to the computer kind of person, and I found that what was happening was I kept rewriting my to-do list. And then as I moved from client to client or office to home or, different location to different location, that paper was getting ruined, or I'd look in my bag and find the sheet that fell off the top that had my to-dos in it. So I switched over to To-Do, and it absolutely changed the way I manage the work that I do personally. And so I have both the web version, I have the desktop client on my Mac, and then I have the mobile version. And so I'm, able to, as Emily was saying, I'm able to do that, sort of on the fly wherever. But one of the things that in my family we really struggle with, my son has ADHD, and he really struggles with executive function and remembering how, what he has to do, when it's due, if there's multiple steps to it. And especially in this sort of COVID era where he was homeschooling a lot, he'd be on a Zoom call and he'd be, enamored with the technology, or excuse me, a Teams call. He'd be enamored with the technology of it. And he'd be playing with the background, and the teacher would be saying, okay, don't forget your X is due tomorrow. And by the time the call was over, that task was gone out of his brain. And so one of the things that I did was he actually figured out that he could, have his Minecraft account log in and get himself to do. So he downloaded To Do on his computer. And now at the end of every lesson, he goes in and he puts in all of his tasks. He can share those tasks with me so that I can actually see whether they're done or not. And then at the end of the day, when he's wrapping up for school, he can go in and he can put in any additional things that he may have missed. And it really is a way for him to help organize his thoughts and organize his days around what's due, when it's due, what's the most pressing, because it really is assisting him in that executive function space.
That's awesome. Derek, Ethan is like 11?
He's 12.
Well, and he's never going to know a world without this.
Exactly. He's always been a kid that thrives on lists and orders, and so when we go on vacation, he stresses out about packing like 2 weeks in advance. Right. So we gave him, he used to use the computer and make a checklist, right? And then he'd check off the different things as he put them in his bag. And so that's really, this is the evolution of that. So he had back when he was physically going to school, he had a checklist for the morning where he could say, put my lunch in my backpack, check, and do those sorts of things. And having it on multiple devices really assisted in him sort of being able to help manage that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Derek.
I want to jump in on To Do for a couple things. First, Mark Chrisman is in the meeting, but he's not in the chat. And so he sent me an offline thing. He said his impression of To Do, especially in the Office 365 tenant level, is that it's front-ending Outlook and Exchange tasks. Is that correct?
Sort of.
That is
I
my
know that
interpretation.
But I don't think they're all there. Like, okay. I think you can add things in To Do that aren't in Outlook, but you can surface things that are in Outlook in To Do. And okay. I think, I don't have definitive answer on this, but I believe what I've anecdotally noticed is that when you put a due date on it, it seems to move it.
Okay.
I think what's going on here is they're actually building, like, I've been thinking about it as like a task fabric that extends into all of these applications, and they're sort of in the middle of that process. But the goal is a task is a task is a task, and you'll see it. I think the end goal is that Teams is really the front for that with the tasks.
I wanted to jump in. We started talking about this topic a month ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that. And this is hearing Derek talk about his son sounded very familiar to me in a lot of ways. And so I started using To Do for a lot of those same things. And I was starting out small just to kind of get my own house in order. And one of the things that I noticed that's kind of consistent with what Mark's question was and what you guys have said is throughout the years, I have tagged about 14 bazillion emails in my various Outlook accounts as things that I needed to do and then never did. 10 years worth of that. And when I first started using To Do, and I reached out to Emily a couple of times, I did the same thing. I had the desktop app. I loaded that up. I put it on my Android phone, and it just didn't work. Like nothing went anywhere ever. If I could get the interface to do anything at all, if I put something on my PC, it would never show up on my phone, so on, all that. And that took a few days, maybe a couple of weeks even, to calm down. And what occurred to me was that To Do was so busy going through 10 years worth of my emails and hundreds of flagged things. It just like there was like a sync storm going on in the background. It just could not keep the hell up. And so once I just left them all up for several days, it kind of died down. So yeah, there is some. So the only thing that I have to add to this whole talk is beware of that. So be tolerant of To Do. If you you do use it, because for me, it literally took a couple of weeks for it to be usable for me because of all of that crap in the background. But then if you've got a bunch of emails in Outlook or tasks in Outlook that you've just never done, prune those out, because that will help the syncing.
So those flagged emails from 2012 talking about setting up Simpraxis as a company, I could probably, or sorry, 2008.
Yeah.
Probably unflag those now.
Well, I don't want to, everybody works at a different speed, so I don't want to.
So,
yeah.
So, I think a lot of what we're talking about is really about that individual task management. And that's the bulk of the content that, everybody has a to-do list. Everybody has a list of things that they need to do. It's also really important to think about how you manage tasks as a team and how you manage tasks as an enterprise. And this was one of those things that we sort of as we were looking at that giant morass of a chart from Microsoft, we wanted to kind of pull things apart, because the teams conversation, at the end of the day, it really does depend, because for us, we work with clients a lot, and we work on teams with more than one person. Maybe it's an internal person, maybe it's an external person, and so I think it's maybe it makes sense to use Planner for those things. Maybe Excel is the right tool to use. I know Mark and I have worked on projects together where the client has used Excel as their bug tracking system because we don't have access to their Jira. I don't want access to their Jira. And so it really makes sense to find the right thing that fits, and it may not be uniform per team. So, one group may be working with a lot of external people through Teams, and Planner in Teams might be the best choice. Another group might be working in Excel that they share on a shared drive somewhere. And it really depends on the work they're doing, who needs to access it.
I think the key here is that as techies, we're used to using things like ticket tracking or ServiceNow. I had to bring that up at some point. Or some sort of more formalized bug tracking or task tracking software. Most of the people in your organization have not been doing that for 15 or 20 years. So a lot of this is new to them. They're probably used to using Outlook, maybe Outlook tasks, maybe a piece of paper, maybe a spreadsheet. So sort of showing them how this fabric is knitting together is something that will be an interesting exercise over time. But it does start to let us not control what everyone's doing, not necessarily, it's not the big brother thing, but being able to sort of see how we're doing on a set of tasks is valuable. Emily and I are working together with Sadie Van Buren on the Microsoft 365 maturity model. We're publishing articles to a repo on, I'll drop it at that. But we've got 5 people working on it, and we're not quite sure where each of us is unless we do something to make that work. And so we're trying to use Planner along with Teams and having those conversations. But we agreed as a group that we were going to experiment with Planner and talk about what we were doing in Teams. And some of it's working well, and some of it isn't. So you have to sort of come up with the right way to make it happen so that everybody gets the right information out of the process. And if someone drops in to help us, we can actually bring them up to speed really quickly. And that's another part of it is, that use case of the new person joining a work effort, which is often the thing that people don't remember, when they're building an intranet, when they're doing whatever. What's that new person going to do to come up to speed?
And for Mark's example of when we were trying to decide how are we going to manage this team working on these different articles, it depended a lot on the specificity of what we needed to measure, right? So as an individual with to-do or Outlook tasks, I'm able to create lists and categories and my due dates, which is pretty much what I want to do individually. In Planner, I also can have these different buckets because it's Kanban boards and due dates, and maybe even some additional steps within Planner. When you need a little bit more specificity than that, that's where maybe a team is now cross-functional, so you're in the enterprise, and you have dependencies. So something has to happen before the next step. Then that's more important to maybe start looking at things like Project Online, which has tasks and subtasks. So this idea of, as Derek mentioned in the beginning, knowing what your outcome is of what you're needing to measure, what kind of reporting do you need to show? What are you measuring off of? Which of these tools lets you measure those items? And you're going to notice Planner's probably on the simpler task management for a team side, and then Project Online is way more complex. So majority of teams don't need Project Online as an example.
But if the team's a development team, tools like Azure Boards or Azure DevOps are going to be interesting because it's a way for me to both manage the work units and also the work outputs, right? With the integration to the code repositories, et cetera. And Git and GitHub are going to work similarly in that regard. And I know Jira and GitHub have some integration for that too. So the type of project, the type of team, the type of work product are really going to drive that as well. We know that this topic could be an hour. And I think Emily has written here a presentation that's going to be an hour at a SharePoint Saturday or a user group or something like that. But we wanted to distill it into the Asks and Praxis format. I know we're close to the top of the hour. Before we go into kind of some resources and takeaways that we can share with you and what some of the upcoming Asks and Praxis topics are, definitely curious for what out of this content resonated with the group on the call, where you would like to drill in deeper, or if you have specific questions for us today. Julie, I don't know if you've been tracking anything in the meeting chat.
No questions.
No questions?
Nope.
Well, knowing some of the folks who've joined us today, I know you're not that shy, so feel free to come off of mute as well.
We've wowed them. They know everything they need to know.
Sean Miller has a question.
All right.
Go ahead. Come off mute. Oh, he's still on mute. Or she, because Sean could spell either way, right? You can type it in the chat too, and I can read it if you want.
Well, Mike, since you called me out, this is Don Hamburger. Since you called me out earlier in joining your some praxis. So my biggest takeaway for me, and I think I've been trying to do this in projects I run, the point you just made about setting task management expectations at the beginning of a project have been super helpful to me. And again, trying out the different platforms, we've tried out Planner, had some successes, had probably more failures than successes with Planner. People just ignore that stuff. But then as you work through the program or through a project, it's been getting better along the way. So setting those expectations and knowing what you need to measure and track is the best things that I've taken away. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, signing that collaboration contract at the beginning of a project. Here's how we're going to work together, right? It's huge.
I think Planner, because initially it was a freestanding thing and you didn't really have any visibility into those tasks anywhere else. That's part of the reason the first tries didn't necessarily work. Now that it's pushing those tasks into To-Do and other places, I think it's going to become a more useful tool.
And I will admit, right, as
Sean, is he? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm on. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Not used to the new updated Teams with the stuff up at the top.
Join the club.
Yeah. So I couldn't send a message because I am not a member of the chat. So just
that's weird.
That.
Some people can get in and some can't. All right, we're gonna have a look into that.
All I was going to say, and maybe you touched on this before I joined because I joined late, is I think for me, OneNote is still my go-to place for all of it. And so until I think there's some integration between OneNote and To-Do, like for me, like I don't have a reason to use To-Do because OneNote is my place. And it seems like it's the one big piece of the Microsoft puzzle that is not connected to all these other sources of tracking.
So we have another slide, Mike, if you want to advance into our appendix. To-Do will be better integrated with showing in Planner in the app within Teams. Right now it's called Planner, but it's going to be renamed to Tasks. I believe it's the fourth one in.
All right, yep, Tasks and Outlook.
Yep, and then
Planner,
after Planner.
Tasks in Teams.
Here we go. This is coming soon. So some people have commented about seeing this in their tenant already. So I do have a lot of faith and trust that To-Do will be better integrated in other places. I've actually been really resistant to adopt it because I was a huge fan of my To-Do tags in OneNote and how I could organize them. But I have seen this shift, and I'm the way that I'm seeing Microsoft spend their time on Planner and To Do, I feel pretty confident in those two items.
Shelley has a question about managing tasks in SharePoint task list, and she's wondering if that will ever be modernized.
I don't have an answer on that, but I'm happy to share an opinion. That one to me appears to be like a lighter version of Project Online because it has tasks and subtasks, and that hasn't been modernized with the other list experiences. So seeing where they're taking Project Online and then Planner as kind of a middle of the road and To Do is the individual task management, I don't have a lot of faith that they will. Would love to hear the other Simpraxians' opinions.
Yeah. I don't think they'll modernize it, but what you could do, Shelley, is, and I think you're sort of hinting at it right there, is that if you had a SharePoint list, you could create a flow that added a task to Planner. I mean, it's an extra step that you would need to go through, but you can actually export. I think we talked about Power Automate when we talked about workflows, but you can actually export flows and reuse them and just hook them up to different lists. So you could definitely do it that way.
Derek, do you mind going back to that slide, Mike?
Yeah, sorry. Which one, Emily?
The one of our grid where I have my green check marks.
Yeah,
I believe it's 6.
This guy.
There we go. Okay.
So I think the telling thing about SharePoint task lists specifically is that in that presentation at Ignite, I don't think they came up. Yeah. So if they're talking about the roadmap for Microsoft around tasks and they're not talking about SharePoint task lists, I don't think they need to say that it's being deprecated. I think we can read that pretty clearly.
Yeah, I'm not going to break any NDA by saying if Microsoft isn't talking about something, that usually means that they're not talking about it for a purpose. It's a good way to go with the guess.
I think that in the new lists, which is the old, meet the new list, same as the old list, the new list templates have, I think, I could be wrong, but isn't one of them like an issue tracker, which feels sort of tasky? So I don't think that they've abandoned the concept of getting work done using lists, but I think that it's taking a different form. They're trying to come up with more modern tools, whatever that means, but tools that are more integrated, that are in this modern fabric that they've built, that sit on top of that substrate that connects all of the apps and services together. So SharePoint task lists in the traditional sense are not part of that.
Yeah, no Gantt charts in modern.
Right. We're at the top of the hour. I just wanted to pull up this slide. Emily, if there's anything in here you want to highlight regarding resources and takeaways.
Sure. So the bottom 3 are the maybe not, that's not accurate. Tasks at Microsoft creating a coherent ecosystem. That is where our first slide comes from. So if you want to have a good understanding of what has been communicated around, to Julie's point, what Microsoft is talking about and where they're spending their time, that's a great session to watch where that initial slide came from. One of the newer blogs that have been released is the top one, Connecting Task Experiences Across Microsoft 365, and that dives a lot deeper into To Do and Planner being within that Teams task app. And then one of our last ones on the bottom, Getting Things Done LinkedIn Learning video. If you are interested in exploring an individual task management framework for yourself, this is a half hour. I highly, highly recommend it.
Thanks, Emily. Our upcoming topics, we're going to talk about learning pathways in 2 weeks and the Microsoft 365 maturity model that Mark spoke about in 4 weeks' time. So if there's anything else, we'll certainly tackle it. But I think that's kind of the structured conversation for today. Julie, anything else lagging out there in the chat?
No. Other than the comment I already made about the Gantt charts, that was the last comment. So.
Yep, perfect. And we know there's a ton more we can drill into, like the way Cortana says see stuff in your email, like, hey, this looks like a task. There's a ton there. So we look forward to drilling into this deeper. Watch for Emily and Simpraxis doing a deeper dive on this topic at upcoming events. And thanks everybody for joining us, spending your time, and sharing your questions and insights.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.